Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. So as you know, with the general election on in the United Kingdom, it was a very busy time of news, plus we had Prince Andrew's interview. And this little bit of news was something that I wanted to discuss, but it did slip under the radar. So I'm going to talk about the rather mysterious death of James Le Mesuriat, who, as most of you know, is the founder of the White Helmets, and his death occurred on the 11th of November. It was shortly after a report came out about the OPCW fixing its own findings into the Duma attack, which of course was used as a pretext for strikes against Syria, and something that many people on the left and the hawks and the neocons wanted to lead to a full-scale invasion. I wondered if the two incidences, that report coming out and his death, were linked. So what I'm going to do is just look a little bit of information on Mesuriat. I'm taking this from both not WikiLeaks, Wikipedia for the basic stuff, something that appeared on Wikispooks, and a discussion that went on in UK Column. I'm also going to discuss the OPCW report just briefly, and then I'm going to compare it to his birth chart and see what we make of it for some astrological context here. So just to tell you, James Gustave Edward Le Mesuriat, he was born on the 25th of May 1971. He was a co-founder of the White Helmets, which, as you know, on the surface of it was a volunteer civil defense organization which was, rushing around Syria. However, as most people have pointed out, it only seemed to operate in Idlib province, where it was controlled by Al-Qaeda. That was one of the only places that it actually operated. In a response in Parliament, one of the MPs got up and asked a question in Parliament about whether there has been an audit into the books, or whether the White Helmets keep records that are publicly available, and he was told that it either wasn't in the public interest or it was classified information. And it's rather interesting that their funding should be classified information, so that raised some red flags for many people. So Le Mesuriat was a British Army officer in the 90s. He also worked in the UN peacekeeping force in the former Yugoslavia, and he was a director of the non-profit organization Mayday Funding. So on the 11th of November, he was found dead in the street at 4:30 in the morning. This was in the Kamankeskara Mustafa Pasha neighborhood of Istanbul. Now, it appeared on the face of it he'd fallen from his balcony. He had fractures to his head and legs. His wife claimed that only a short while earlier they'd gone to bed and he'd taken sleeping tablets. And the Turkish police were treating it as suicide. And I think although there were rumblings in the Western media that it might have been a state actor, they were trying to point a finger at maybe Russia. It now seems to be accepted that accepted in the mainstream media that it was suicide, and his wife submitted his recent medical history where he was suffering from depression. Apparently his body was then repatriated to London, and the investigation has continued, but there has been no further talk about it in the media. It's just kind of dropped off the radar. So in December, the Turkish authorities confirmed the injuries sustained were consistent with a fall from a balcony, and they said it was general body trauma linked to a fall from a height. No DNA from anyone else was found on the body, and according to the toxicology report, they found signs of sleeping pills, which matched the description given by his widow. But I don't think there should necessarily be any correlation between taking sleeping pills and jumping off a balcony, or taking sleeping pills and being so depressed that you would want to jump off a balcony. So Maria Zakharova, who's the press spokesperson for the Russian Federation, she accused the White Helmets founder of being an MI6 agent with links to Al-Qaeda. And obviously the UK ambassador categorically denied that. But his past, I would say it's rather interesting, and many of us who've watched the Syrian conflict are skeptical of the White Helmets. A lot of us see them as an organization that was aiding and abetting disinformation and the funding of radical groups with a view to regime change. They were almost instruments of regime change and instruments of propaganda, because they always seemed to be first on the scene when there were any of these chemical attacks. And in most cases, it was them providing the prima facie evidence that there had been a chemical attack with their videos running with people, with children, and showing footage. And therefore, I mean, what seems to matter most in these conflicts is the information that comes out in the first 24 hours or 48 hours. No serious investigation as to what actually happened can take place on a chemical or biological level in such a short time. And it really is the emotional impact of those pictures that cause governments to want to act and to bomb and to continue regime change. And so it's all about that emotional impact in the first few hours, rather than the actual evidence which emerges at a later date when everyone moves on. It's that initial evidence with the pictures that was being provided by the White Helmets, which was providing the impetus to go and either bomb or to attack. Fortunately, I think a lot of us were relieved that President Trump is not in a mind to continue the crisis in Syria or to escalate it. He was always in a mind to bring it down and to leave Bashar al-Assad there, because anything else would lead us into a Libya situation and into a Iraq situation, quite obviously, which is something a lot of people don't seem to realize. That these things don't work. You know, a lot of people on the left and the hawks seem to be very keen on this sort of thing, and they don't seem to grow out of it. So in July 2018, a Wikipedia user created a forward from James Le Mesuriat to their page on the White Helmets. But at that stage, James Le Mesuriat didn't actually have a dedicated page. But at 11:51 on the day of his death, suddenly on Wikipedia, a page was created, and it was expanded with a lot of details. And the interesting thing about Le Mesuriat's page is there's been frequent updates on it by Philip Cross. Now, if many of you will know, George Galloway certainly discussed this, that Philip Cross is not so much a person as rather than a consortium of people who regularly, I mean, when I say regularly, I mean every minute of the day, are adapting or editing Wikipedia pages, particularly to target people who would be seen as enemies. George Galloway's page is frequently edited by Philip Cross. It's usually to provide some disinformation or to discredit people who might be questioning actions of the state. So Philip Cross was very much involved in editing this Wikipedia page of Le Mesuriat, I would say, in order to kind of, what would you say, to flush out the general story, like, oh, well, the White Helmets are doing a great job, it's humanitarian, the film on them won an Oscar, isn't it all great? So, let's have a look. So what I was going to look at is what was on the Twitter sphere the day that he died. Well, UK Column News reported that Mark Urban tweeted this. He was one of the first people in the UK tweeting. He's a journalist, and the interesting thing about him is he interviewed Sergei Skripal 6 months before the attack in Salisbury. So he's obviously well connected. I'm not sure at the time, 6 months before Skripal's attack, what interest his interview would have had to anyone, because I don't think he was in the news or he was very interesting to anybody at that stage. So why interview him unless there was a kind of, what would you say, anticipation that he may be in the news at some point later, although that is rather conspiratorial, I admit. So, Le Mesuriat, he was 48 years old when he died. He was the founder of the White Helmets, of course, and a former British military officer. We covered that. He was found dead on the street below his apartment. Mark Urban said on Twitter, "I have no idea whether Le Mesuriat was once in MI6. I don't think I ever met him. But it will now fall to Turkey to conduct a thorough investigation in order to ascertain whether there was state involvement, and the info campaign against him was a prelude to murder." So that tweet was later that day deleted, but UK Column did have a picture of it. So speculation was rife, of course, of whether there was a state actor involved. So the British side was sort of pushing that it might have been Syria or Russia. The Turkish authorities were leaning towards suicide, and many people just felt that it was, rather nefarious. As far as I know, no one else linked it to what I'm going to link it to. That's why I'm going to do that. So he fell off his balcony, but other reports said he was found near a mosque. Some reports said there was damage to his head and his limbs, as I already said. Other reports said there were slash marks to his cheek and broken hands and feet. Mark Urban also said on Twitter that a colleague of his said he knew that flat very well, the flat where Mesuriat and his wife were living, and he said it was impossible to fall from that balcony. You can find that link on 21st Century Wire. I can actually add a link to it. So, those in the alternate media were very skeptical, as you know, about the White Helmets, their real purpose and their funding, and therefore very skeptical about the death of Mesuriat, especially as it comes in a phase where Al-Qaeda and ISIS have been almost eradicated from Syria, and the White Helmets really have no role anymore. So as I said, Mark Urban later deleted these texts, and he took on the line that, well, Turkey said it was suicide, it's obviously suicide. So Mark Urban also has a history with Pablo Miller, who was the Skripal's handler. So he was kind of insinuating that there in his tweet that he does meet members of MI6, and Mesuriat wasn't someone he knew, but obviously from that tweet he'd considered the possibility that Mesuriat was MI6. So as we know, there was a huge amount of money given to the White Helmets by the West, almost 200 million. They only operated in Al-Qaeda-held Idlib. And as of 2019, late 2019, the White Helmets were so scaled back due to the recapturing of Syria in the main by Assad, but they were still collecting money. But the question is, why would Russia sort of take him out if the rebels were already defeated? So I'm going to say that on October the 29th, 2019, there was an article by Alan McLeod, and he covered the OPCW's fixed report. So just to go back, in Douma, Syria, April 2018, dozens of people died in a suspected chemical weapons attack in the eastern suburb of the capital of Damascus. Of course, many countries immediately blamed Bashar al-Assad, said he was responsible, and they wanted to respond with a bombing campaign against his forces. Yet, new evidence coming to light in October, leaked from whistleblowers, suggests that not only was the Western story on shaky ground, but the report into the incident from the OPCW deliberately suppressed evidence and testimony that contradicted the Western narrative. So the OPCW, of course, was founded in 1997 to represent the interests of its 193 members, and it oversees and verifies adherence to the rules that regulate chemical weapons, etc. So after its fact-finding mission was complete, they issued a report about this alleged Douma attack. It wasn't really conclusive or damning. It refused to even speculate on who was responsible for the attacks, but it did suggest there was likely a chlorine attack carried out by dropping gas canisters from the air. This seemed to contradict its own interim findings that said that no organophosphorus nerve agents or their degradation products were detected either in the environmental samples or in plasma samples from the alleged casualties. Nevertheless, some did insinuate that the report implicated government forces. But others criticized the findings. For example, Piers Robinson, who's co-founder of the Organisation for Propaganda Studies and former chair in Politics, Society and Political Journalism at Sheffield, he said the report contained significant abnormalities and was unpersuasive, to put it mildly. And he said there were many contradictions on analysis of chemicals used, of method of delivery, and much more. So let's get to October the 15th, when Robinson's fears appear to have been confirmed when an OPCW whistleblower met in secret with a panel of international experts, including the first Director General of the organization, Dr. José Bastoni. And after looking at all the evidence provided by the whistleblower, the panel came to the conclusion that the OPCW had both suppressed and distorted its data, the analysis and the conclusions, saying that key information about chemical analysis, toxicology, ballistics investigations and witness statements were suppressed, ostensibly to favour a preordained conclusion. The panel also expressed alarm that there were efforts to exclude certain inspectors from the investigation or from allowing them to express differing opinions and observations. Reminds me a lot about climate change, doesn't it? Preordained conclusions. Yeah, you have all the facts there, but you create the models or conduct the investigation in a way that prejudices the outcome towards something that they wanted to get. Yeah. So dissenting assessments that concluded that the gas canisters were probably placed in Duma rather than dropped from an aircraft suggested an altogether different scenario to the one the US government, and I'd say the West in general, including our government, was presenting. So those assessments were suppressed. So the assessments, obviously, that the gas canisters were placed rather than dropped were suppressed. So on the new evidence provided, Dr. Bastani said it confirmed the doubts and suspicions that he'd already had about the incoherent initial report, saying that the picture is clearer now and very disturbing. So I just thought it was rather interesting that this report was on the 15th of August. Mesuriat's rather unusual death, which I think is one that we could read a lot into, happens on the 11th of November. It always seems to be in these situations they have to find a fall guy. Obviously, with Epstein, they would like you to think that he was the head of the snake, and now that the head has been removed, the whole thing has gone away, whereas he's probably just a fall guy, whereas the whole network is still in place, still up and running. However, we as the public are meant to believe, the threat or the problem has been eradicated. And I think it's the same with Le Mesurier. If they were anticipating that there was going to be any fallout that could have implicated the white helmets in these situations, all they did was got rid of, well, I can't say obviously, but we could interpret it that way, or have suspicions that he was got rid of in order to put a roadblock in the way of any further inquiries in this direction. So maybe the white helmets are just going to die a death. So I mentioned that I would discuss Le Mesurier's chart. He was born on May 25th, 1971. I obviously don't have a time, but what's very interesting is, if you've listened to my previous broadcasts, I've said that there's a key aspect present in many people who were assassinated, including JFK, Abraham Lincoln, Indira Gandhi. Yeah, and that aspect is either a square or an opposition between Saturn and Neptune, and it would have to be connected to a personal planet or the ascendant. In the case of Le Mesurier, it's connected to the Sun, because he has a Sun conjunct Saturn opposite Jupiter conjunct Uranus. And I feel that's quite interesting, and that was triggered by transiting Uranus. Sorry, it's Saturn opposite Neptune, not Uranus. And it's I'm going to put this chart on my blog, and I'll leave you a link to it so you can have a look at my chart yourself just to see what I'm talking about. But the opposition between Saturn and Neptune was triggered by transiting Uranus, which was exactly opposite Saturn at the time. And solar arc Mars was opposite his Pluto, which is often a sign of some sort of violence and physical harm. And he has natally a Mars conjunct the North Node in Aquarius. Now, I've often seen when Mars is conjunct the North Node, it indicates a violent death, often to do with murder. And that was also activated by solar arc Pluto, which was roughly squaring the midpoint between Mars and the North Node. It's rather wide conjunction, but it is applying one. Mars at 10 Aquarius, North Node at 11, North Node 17 degrees Aquarius, Mars being 10 degrees Aquarius. So I just thought that was interesting to look at his chart and just have a little recap of what was going on there. So thanks for that, and don't forget, I'll leave a link to this chart for the visuals underneath in the description box.